Hi everybody, I'm Matt Anderson, and for the last 20 years, I've coached thousands of financial advisors on how to get out of their own way. And what I want to talk about in this video are the 7 biggest mistakes I've seen them make time and time again, over and over, and then coach on the 5 best ways to overcome it. I also want to add, if you're not a financial advisor, yes, I've coached people in other industries. I've coached mortgage brokers, real estate agents, people, accountants, lawyers, all kinds of different people, basically people that are responsible for generating business owners. So if you fit that description, stay tuned because I promise this will be helpful. Now let me get started. Mistake number 1, instead of listening to the voice of the person who wants us to be better, instead we're listening to our inner critic way too much. We're listening to that fear-based, scarcity-minded voice that's telling us, oh, don't make that call, don't put yourself out there, oh, don't think big, don't invest in yourself. Completely crazy, right? That's mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 is, instead of comparing ourselves to our recent past self, and instead of aligning ourselves with things that we truly value, we get completely sucked in, hook, line, and sinker, to the incredibly clever, extremely well-paid, very creative, human psychology expert marketers who have basically sold us on their definition of happiness because it will get us to buy stuff. And even more perverse, quite frankly, is we see people that have more and bigger stuff than us, and then we assume that they're happier than we are. And so, we just mess up our own heads, and then we compare ourselves to those people instead of focusing on where we were a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, so we can get on that trajectory of progress. Third mistake we make is, instead of spending lots of time with people that elevate us, with battery charger type people, supporters, encouragers, we listen to the naysayers, we listen to the dream stealers who ultimately get into our heads such that we talk ourselves out of becoming the person we really want to become. This is very upsetting, really. That's mistake number 3. Mistake 4 is, we have no idea often how much we have to be grateful for. And this can sound really hokey, right? But we have to put some perspective on this. We're 6% of the people that are alive on the planet that have ever lived. So we're already in this tiny dimension of people. If you're watching this, the chances are incredibly high. You live in a pretty nice neighborhood compared to billions of people on the planet. And let alone all of those things, there are many things day to day that make us grateful. And when you follow people, when I think about my highest achieving clients, they have a gratitude practice and they attract in more of what they want. So my point is, instead of having this sense of gratitude for what we do have, way too many people have more of a sense of entitlement, like just because by their birthright somehow of the postcode or zip code where they're born, that they're entitled to have this great life without really having to work all that hard for it. Which leads into mistake number 5, which is when we do get results that are pretty mediocre, we don't, instead of taking responsibility for it, instead of seeking out the information that we're looking for, instead of then taking action on that information, and let's face it, there aren't any secrets anymore, like it's all public information. But instead of doing that, we have this tendency to blame, to make excuses, to complain about things. And that's something that we just got to start catching much, much faster. Mistake 6, and this is really, paying homage to Zig Ziglar, but instead of trying to help more people get what they want, most of us spend far too much time obsessing about me, about that, the little clod of ailments that George Bernard Shaw talked about as the worst case scenario of the human being. We should be we want to be spending way more time helping other people. And then the last mistake, and perhaps the most foolish of all of them, is that throughout all of the thousands of years that people have been on the planet, there's no secret about the recipe to becoming a high achiever. And yet, in recent decades, we've been sucked into this notion that there's a quick fix, that there's an overnight success, that there's a 4-hour work week, that there's instant millions around the corner. People are always looking for this easy route, this shortcut, this hack or app to success, instead of just doing the work that needs to be done. And so, to me, those are the most common mistakes. And look, I've made those mistakes. And that's perhaps one of the reasons I'm so upset about it, as I've seen it in myself, and I see it in almost all the people I work with. And it doesn't have to be that way. But there's another fascinating and very exciting thing, and I will say actually very few people do know about this. And that is, if I had to pick one thing beyond those 7 mistakes though, that we just don't seem to know much about and gives us the biggest chance to make a change, perhaps the biggest obstacle, the biggest missing piece out there, you want to know what it is? It's identity. It's that we don't spend enough time asking ourselves the question, who do I want to become? What type of person do I want to be? And the best way I can explain this to you is by talking about New Year's resolutions. Because I think it's fair to say, and I hope you would agree with me, that on New Year's Day, there are, in all likelihood, billions of people around the world waking up that morning with a renewed sense of optimism. And again, try to put yourself in that January the 1st mindset of it's just this blank page. It seems like there's opportunity again. And let's face it, I will say nothing profound next when I tell you what you already know, in that really almost everybody wants the same things in life. We want financial freedom. We want great health. We want a thriving business or professional life. We want meaningful work. We want relationships with people we love and that care about us, and we can enjoy spending time with them. And perhaps above all else, we all want to make a positive difference in the world. And that's the spirit of hope that we get on New Year's Day. So, feel that for a second. And then I'm laughing because then I'm thinking about those people that I see at the gym. And then there's the gym regulars, right? The people that go week in, week out. And they know the way New Year's resolutions work. They know that for the first 3 weeks of January, they can't get their parking spot. But they don't get too upset. They just joke about it with one another because they also know that by week 3 or 4 in January, it won't be a problem again. Because all that optimism and hope that everybody had at the beginning of the year, for almost everybody, it's already fallen by the wayside. And why? It's because of this word identity. It's because people don't know that they've got to get their brains on board with where they want to go. And this is where I want to now transition into, so what are these 5 ways that you can use to overcome all these mistakes that frankly just about all of us make, at least from time to time? So what's the first thing? The first thing is what I talked about earlier, shifting your identity. And what do I mean by that? So what I mean by that is asking yourself the question, what type of person do I want to become? Who do I want to be? Because, as I talked about with the problem with New Year's resolutions is the initial desire fades. Knowledge is not enough action. Showing up to the gym a few times, it doesn't work when our brain doesn't buy in. So in order for any change to actually happen, we've got to get our brain on board. And the exciting fact that you want to keep top of mind is that all of us, have neuroplastic brains. Like there's this neuroplasticity to our brains, which means they can literally physically change when we keep channeling those thoughts, that focus, again, on the person we want to become. Is there more to it than that? Yes, and that's my point number 2, but I'm not done with identity. There are other identity shifts that I also see have to happen with advisors in order to make that elevation as well. Another of those is changing from salesperson to advisor. If that doesn't happen, all these other steps don't work. Another mindset shift that has to happen is what I call it the half marathon mindset. In other words, this works for everyone unless you are truly a marathon runner, but most of us aren't. But it's this notion that if you really want to accomplish something, it's not easy. It's going to take quite a bit of work and preparation. And if you imagine what you would need to do in order to truly run over 13 miles, since most of us couldn't step out the door right now and do it, it's just having that mindset about going where you want to go. In other words, just keep doing the right things, and just stay in the race. So that's the mindset piece that has to come first. And now you've got you're legitimately saying, well, that's not enough, surely. And of course it's not enough, right? So point number 2 is we need to create power habits. And that's the doing part. But so it starts in the brain, and then we have to prove to our brains that we're becoming this type of person by actually taking action. So that's the biggest mistake that most people make about trying to change. And ironically, learning how to change can be remarkably easy. Yes, you need to be persistent and stick at it, but the small change itself doesn't have to be that hard when you know how. So, in fact, most positive change happens gradually. So that's another piece to understand, and that learning to change is a skill that anyone can learn once they know how. And those power habits are the things that give you the 80% of the results from the 20% of the efforts. So that's the second component to how do you overcome making these mistakes, and why. And even though we think we know all about habits, let me politely and with the greatest respect remind you that the reason why they're so unbelievably dynamite is because once you've got something as a habit, you don't have to think about it, right? It's autopilot. When you've got something as a habit, you're going to do it whether you feel like it or not, which is priceless. Right? You're not going to overanalyze something and second guess yourself. It's a habit. You're just going to do it. And that's the third priceless piece to this, is you're no longer dependent on your motivation, because that's such a fickle friend. All of us, I don't care who we're talking about, even the highest achievers of people I work with that easily hand over fist make 7 figures year in, year out and more. Their motivation goes up and down and up and down and up and down. And what they've mastered is this piece and the habit piece. Point number 3 is you need to develop a process, a formal structured process, so that you can ask anyone for anything. And what mistakes do people make there? Well, most people are uncomfortable asking for what they want, especially for people that they see somehow as sort of a bit better than them, and kind of get psyched out by them. Don't have the right wording, and don't have almost no one has a process around asking for what they want. And there is one. And that is what I've been teaching for about 20 years. So once you've got that piece in place, now the chips can start to fall your way. Head's in the right place. Habits are working for you on autopilot. You've got a process now to be able to step up and ask for all the things that you need. And then the fourth piece to that, of course, is that isn't going to happen without the right people. And this is the most obvious sounding point I'm going to make, and yet probably the one where people put in the least work and therefore don't get the right results, which is we need to turn our relationships into advocates. And it's funny, when I talk about this, it's very easy to think, oh, I got that one sorted, thanks, that's easy. And this is the problem. It sounds obvious, it sounds straightforward, but the mistake that we all make, the biggest mistake we all make is that we all overrate the quality of the relationships we have. And what we're thinking about is our client retention. In other words, just because clients aren't leaving us, we assume that our relationships are great, when in fact, many of them are good enough. And especially for the financial advisor audience, you're generally attracted to that line of work because you're a good people person. So you are good with relationships, but the proof is in the pudding. How many of them are recommending you? And I don't mean to hit a sore point, but usually the answer is a painfully small percentage. So that's why point number 4 is we've got to turn these relationships into advocates. And that requires work and effort and thoughtfulness. And if I had to pick one thing that makes all the difference, it's when the relationship shifts from where that other person, they can just sense that you genuinely care about them as a human being. So that's point number 4. And then point number 5 is you have to accept that you are your own biggest obstacle. In other words, you're the one that sometimes gets a bit too complacent, sometimes lacks focus, sometimes, maybe not sometimes, has permanently hit an income ceiling that you just can't break through, that there are people that psych you out and you're not asking them for what you want, even though they could open bigger and better doors for you, that there's some worthiness that we don't want to talk about that's also limiting what we're striving for. It's just one of those things that is common for almost everybody, and yet we need to address it and we don't because it's uncomfortable a little bit. There's the inconsistency that goes on that's very, very common. And then there's the disorganization that sometimes people have, where again, all these little things that add up, and consequently we're not having those breakthroughs that we want. So those are the 7 biggest mistakes I see people make, and I've also talked about the 5 best ways to overcome them. I've had my turn in sharing with you. I'd love to hear from you. So please leave a comment below. I'd be most interested in perhaps what hit the hit your nerve the most, but also anything either that you found really helpful or that you want to do next would also be great. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you next time.